Hi, this video is sponsored by GameMaker, and there will be a dedicated segment somewhere around the middle where I talk about my experience of using that game engine and of teaching with it. Please enjoy. Playtesting is often a crucial part of developing a game, or a good one at least, and what I wanted to do in this video was try and give you some sort of practical introduction to how to actually do playtests. The problem is, there isn't really a one-size-fits-all approach to playtesting that works because games are such a varied medium and there's usually not a one-size-fits-all approach that you can use for anything. So what I've done instead is gathered a bunch of developers from the Indie Game Clinic Discord, many of whom have made way more games than I have, to share with you their playtesting methodologies. Not just how they organize and run playtests and how they get playtesters in the first place, but why they do it that way and how it benefits their games. But before we get into anything too specific, let's start with the big why. Why is playtesting so important and what is it meant to achieve?
So obviously playtesting is important. That's why this video exists.
As the developer, it's literally impossible to give yourself the experience of a first-time player, so you have to get it secondhand.
After working on a single game for a while, I myself can feel like an unreliable observer. It can be hard to put myself in the shoes of a new player, and so I literally need to have them play it so I can see what they're seeing.
Is your game fun? Do players understand it? Are they getting tripped up on anything in particular? Can they finish the game? Do they like it?
Playtest early and playtest often. It really exposes what the game is and what it's lacking. And that can be really scary. You know, games are perfect in our heads and in the dev environment, but they're real in front of our players.
See, the thing about games is that they have good parts and they have bad parts. And here's the thing about bad parts, they kind of suck. Your game might have a bunch of elements that make it great, but just a couple frustrating or discordant elements within your game can completely ruin the entire experience.
I find motivation as the other secret sauce you get out of playtests. It's easy to be overly critical of your own work. The whole reason I'm doing this is to make fun games for people. So just seeing someone delighted about a little thing, or seeing people not get all turned around by something that I thought was complicated, or somebody saying, please, can I have more video game? Like that, it's all super motivating to keep me going.
Playtesting is important because we're creating experiences for people, and unless we get to witness them have those experiences, it's very difficult to know what we're even making.
So there are lots of good reasons why playtesting is a good thing to do in general, why game development should include playtesting. Playtesting is the next best thing to being able to put yourself in the shoes of a real player, but there's also a more specific kind of why question that you need to ask when you come to playtesting, and that is, why are you running this particular playtest specifically? What in your game needs validating or clarifying at this stage in development? This is why it's helpful sometimes to have a bit of a goal to your playtesting, even if you don't stick to it very strictly.
You need to be sensible with your budget of testers because sometimes it's hard to get them. With that, you then go and define indicators based on your goal. Those are things that you want to see happen or not happen during the play session, because you can get more information with that instead of just relying on verbal feedback or surveys. If you have playtesting guidelines, that's also useful. Is for things that you want to remember to say or do before, during, or after the play session. It may be as simple as remember to say thank you and do you have any more questions, things like that.
Set goals for both development work and the playtest itself. New features are nice, but why are you adding them? Playtests help to determine if those features are achieving what you want them to and they're effective for your game.
It feels to me like a science experiment sometimes where you have a hypothesis, like, I think this moment or system will make this type of player think this thought or feel this feeling or take this action. And then you have to go out and gather data and confirm whether or not that actually happens. And sometimes something else entirely happens, and it could be something terrible or wonderful or boring. And playtesting helps discover those unexpected things too, which is also important.
Playtesting can be useful for different purposes at different stages of a project. One reason for playtesting very early on is to see if the idea of your game is even appealing enough for it to be worth making it in the first place. I'll let Chris tell you more about that.
I've recently learned that playtesting as early as possible is the best way to go, specifically for the reason of validating a game idea. When myself and Vin from Hillfort Games were making 10 Bells, we hardly playtest. We playtested very little, and it was towards the end of the game. And 10 Bells was successful despite of this. So we count ourselves very lucky that even though we didn't playtest early on, it was still successful. My second launch, Orbs, 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 that was an absolute and total flop. And I put that down to not playtesting early enough to validate the game idea. It was actually really difficult to find playtesters to play Orbs, Orbs, Orbs. And that should have been the huge red flag. It was a bit too mobile gamey. That was the main feedback I got. So it wasn't a game that was suitable for a Steam platform. And I would have known this if I'd have playtested the game earlier on, which I didn't. I've had some prototypes since then which haven't really been validated, but my most recent game, a game about making a planet, has been validated on multiple platforms. It's had lots of views and plays on itch, it's had lots of feedback and discussions on Reddit, and it's had lots of comments and interest and views on YouTube as well. I wouldn't have got that if I hadn't have put something on itch as soon as possible to get something in players' hands as quickly as possible to see if there was something there that people could hold on to and, you know, comment on and intrigue them basically. So yeah, I've learned that playtesting as early as possible is imperative for the ultimate success of a game. So you'll know early on if you playtest early if the game has legs or not.
Playtesting a game early on to validate the idea is helpful, and I think Chris hit on a really useful insight there. If you can't find any playtesters, then maybe the game idea just isn't interesting or appealing in the first place. But even if people do like the idea of your game and express interest in testing it, it can still be a bad idea to put off playtesting too long. Let's go over to Dryden, developer of Disinherited, to find out why.
I think a lot of devs are afraid to playtest too early. The thought being that if the vision isn't like fully realized, then you won't be able to get quality feedback on it, or that the feedback will somehow corrupt the vision. But in my experience, it's pretty much the opposite. The vision is a lot more foggy and malleable than you might expect, and the feedback functions as a whetstone that you can sharpen it against. So the longer I've been developing, the faster I try to get something into people's hands for playtesting. My first game, I spent an entire year on it before I let anyone else interact with it. The playtest went somewhat okay, but I discovered that the first section of this Metroidvania that I'd poured all this time into was too long, too difficult, too easy to get lost in, and didn't introduce the unique mechanics early enough. And the idea of having to redesign and reimagine something that was so finished was very overwhelming. Now, I learned a lot still from it, but all of that could have been avoided if I hadn't been so precious about revealing it. In contrast, I did a game for a Pass the Game Jam on Lazy T's channel last year. At the end of day one, I had a working something that I could give to some close friends and get some feedback on. At the end of practically every day, I'd upload to the private itch page and get their thoughts. By the end of that week, I had something that was considered a finished product by the rest of the devs in the Pass the Game chain. And I would chalk that up to having 3 or 4 pairs of trusted eyes already look at it and tell me what was breakable, aimless, confusing, or out of place.
So you've already had some explanation as to why it's important to test early. But what about deeper into development? When else should you playtest your game? The answer might surprise you. Actually, it probably won't. It's something along the lines of regularly, all the time, over and over again, you know, that kind of stuff.
So my advice starts with 1, make playtests a core part of your development cycle. And you can do this by 2, establishing a consistent development to testing cadence. 2-week sprints are very common in software development, but you can adjust this depending on your circumstances and energy.
As a self-confessed artsy-fartsy person, I'm often a little bit uncomfortable with treating game dev as if it's just another type of software development. But when it comes to production processes, it makes absolute sense to treat playtesting as part of an iterative cycle. It's not just for checking whether the last thing you did was good or not, it also helps you prioritize what to do next and which direction to take the project in. We all know from practice, from school and work, that we need deadlines in order to get work done on time. And one of the things that indie developers often struggle with is just applying this logic to their own projects, treating themselves like their own boss and saying, we need to do this by this date. Building playtesting into your development processes means that you've always got a deadline to be thinking about, and that can be really helpful for your own productivity as well.
Hey, I'm Rocky Mullet. I'm making a survival city builder with Sandstorm called Storm Settlers. I split my playtests in 3 waves. The first wave is the smallest one. I just need 2 or 3 people to try the game and find the obvious problems. Those things that will be obvious for everyone but me, so that I can take care of those easy fixes first to avoid ruining the playtest, because all the feedback is about one annoying thing. The second wave is when I ping everywhere and everyone to get the most people, so I can have enough feedback that I can see patterns and recurring feedback, to have a general vibe of what's wrong with my game, over the opinion of a single playtester. During the first 2 waves, I'll be changing things in the game, balancing stuff, adding new icons and information, trying to fix the issues brought up by the playtesters, so I can go for the third and final wave. That's when I'll be more selective. That's when I'll poke people like Doug from Indie Game Clinic, or people who said they'd like to playtest the game, to try to confirm my changes, because sometimes tackling some feedback can take 3, 4, 5 iterations before I actually fix the problems. I've done that process twice on my game so far, and what really convinced me of playtest efficacy was that in the second playtest, I received a lot more feedback about the late game features that didn't change at all between the 2 playtests. I understood that in the first playtest, a lot of players would simply give up and stop playtesting before the end, and the changes I made to tackle the playtesters' feedback allowed the players to enjoy themselves more on the second playtest and reach further into the game. I believe the greatest impact of playtesting is on UX and onboarding, since they are both super important and very hard to test on my own. Even when it comes to difficulty, I can be tempted to make the game easier when I get the feedback that the game is too hard. But sometimes the real issue is that the player is confused and does not understand the game's mechanics, and is not ready to be challenged yet. After my second playtest, I was doing some planning toward the final release for my game, and I made sure that all the tasks related to playtesters' feedback would be tackled first, before adding any new content. To be sure to first fix what I already have, because there's no point of adding new content most players would simply never see if they stop playing before the end. Now that it's done, I can start adding new content that will, of course, lead to yet another playtest.
Every day, I'm not sure of what I need to be working on to finish my game. There's art and music and new mechanics and new content and marketing, a million things. And it can be a little bit overwhelming what task to pull in next. And by getting playtests in, you get to see what common things people are having friction with. You get to see what common things players are really enjoying. You get to see what pieces of content are lacking. And all those things are really helpful to kind of like filter out what's the most important thing to work on next. So in the absence of a huge team and a project manager telling you what to do, just seeing what people struggle with and seeing what people like makes it crystal clear of the next day. I need to focus on this huge area. And if I do that, it'll make the game better. So focus, number 1, helps me out a bunch.
For me, it's this sense of prioritization that is really one of the most helpful things that I get out of running playtests. When I'm working on a game, I usually already have quite a solid vision of what I want it to be in the end. In my head, I know what the core gameplay concept is, some of the story, I know which parts of the game I'm personally excited to work on. Other people's feedback on the game just helps me work out which parts I need to focus on next, which new features and content need to be given higher priority, and which existing parts of the game need more clarity in order for them to really shine and have the impact that I want them to have. As the designer and director of my game, I decide what's important, but playtesters help me decide what's more urgent to resolve sooner. When working on my procedural platformer Dirt World, early playtesting helped us to identify issues with controls and communication which weren't just important to solve eventually, they needed to be fixed then before the game could really be tested with a larger group of testers. Those of you who have been following the channel for a while might have seen me working on this game in a stream or on a devlog. I just want to take a quick moment to tell you about the engine the Dirt World is made in, GameMaker, the sponsors of this video. I've been working as a game designer and game dev educator for nearly a decade now, and I've used a lot of different tech on different projects. Working in design in larger studios, you're constantly jumping around between different types of documents and software, but game design isn't programming, it's a different job. And because I haven't spent years focused on learning traditional programming languages like Java or C#, I was always a little bit behind on the technical side of things. When I started teaching a university game design course back in 2018, I picked up GameMaker in a few months and then built our first year Intro to Game Dev course around it. We had students from a range of different backgrounds with different experience and qualifications. Some of them were technical, some of them were more artistic, and I wanted a way for them to all be able to make their own 2D games entirely from scratch without being held back by traditional programming languages. One of the things that makes GameMaker easy to learn is that you can start with a visual approach, clicking together blocks of logic, and then when you're ready, convert that over into GameMaker's GML language. GML is much closer to natural English than a lot of the languages that other game engines use. The documentation is really solid and easy to use, and the support community on Discord is fantastic too. So, if you're thinking about making games but you haven't started yet, or maybe you've tried another tool before and struggled with it, click the link below to find out what GameMaker has to offer. It's free, and you never know, you might end up making the next Hyperlight Drifter, Fields of Mystria, maybe even the next Dirt World. So far, we've touched on why and when to playtest, but we haven't really talked about how to do it. How do you get playtesters? And then once you've got them, what do you do with those crazy cats? Over to you, game developers.
What I do is, number 1, Discord servers. Number 2, itch. Number 3, my YouTube channel. I'm participating on game engine servers. Look for game jams on itch.io. Game jams where you can submit your project are gold. And my YouTube channel is the third one. It's quite small. Right now I have 83 followers, but even with 83 followers, I already have some people willing to playtest my games. So I guess I'll continue.
I first started my YouTube channel so that some people would know about the little games I make. It's not a very good promotion tool. It takes a lot of time, and the viewers aren't players, but mostly other game devs. That being said, devs are great playtesters. So I always combine the start of a playtest with a YouTube video asking for playtesters. Viewers are happy to help, and while I'm no Jonas style roller, just the couple thousand views I get are enough for me to find the playtesters I need to improve my game.
Here are some devs talking about the kind of small-scale, observed playtesting you might do on a smaller project or earlier on in the development of a game. This kind of playtesting could be really helpful because if your first playtest is on Steam and you invite 1,000 people and they all complain about the same thing, you done did a boo-boo. You're going to game design jail.
I would say ask anybody. You know, you've got friends and family, and a lot of them have probably played video games before. They don't have to be game developers to give you good feedback. The challenge is, how do you get the good feedback out of them? You could send them a link to your game and say, give me some feedback, please. And most likely they're going to give you like, wow, this is a fun game. Neat. But they're not going to give you anything really substantial that can help you improve what you're doing. So what I would recommend is a moderated playtest. And these are super easy. All you have to do is just ask your friend, hey, I'm making this cool new game. It would really help me out to watch someone play it. You got 30 minutes next week to just go through that with me? Most people are going to say yes for that. You can do it in person, but you can also just do it on a video call. Super easy. You just need access to their screen, and you need access to audio. So can you talk in real time?
In my case, I would do it via Zoom calls with friends and family, recording their screen and audio, and I would ask them to just think out loud, stream of consciousness style. I wouldn't jump in if they got confused unless they got completely stuck or there was some kind of bug blocking them and I didn't want them wasting their time. I would take as many notes as possible and I would ask them a standard set of questions at the end.
Another little decryption method is to watch what they do, not what they say. In person is the best. You can tell if a game is having the desired effect by watching if they're tensed up or relaxed, whether their eyes are on the screen or kind of wandering, whether they're gripping the controller really hard or even sweating or turning red. But even without the body language, like in a Discord call or over a video recording, people react vocally in ways that are pretty unguarded. And if you don't have those reactions, then you can watch in-game behavior. Do they wander around in confusion? Do they read all of the dialogue? Do they try to push the movement mechanics immediately, or do they wait until everything's tutorialized? When they reach a fail state, do they try again, or do they immediately put it down? From these details, you can read beyond what they're saying and into what they're doing.
You just start off the session saying, you're not going to hurt my feelings, anything you say, I just want your honest feedback. You want to prompt people to narrate their thoughts. So as they play the game, like, what are they thinking? Are they getting frustrated with anything? You might need to keep prompting them that as they're playing. With a little bit of nudging, people get into the habit pretty quickly. And then the last thing you want to do is just try not to interfere too much. So let them struggle as they're going through a tutorial. It's very painful to not want to jump in there and help somebody, but it's important to see the friction as people are going through a game. That being said, if you're there to answer questions, it's really nice to be right at the point of where friction is in your game and being able to dig into that while they're there. So if your friend is trying out your new crafting system and they're stuck, or they just finished forging a sword or something, you could jump in and say, how did that feel? What did you like about that? If this was just a link you're sending over and you're asking them to give you feedback later, they might not even bring that up at all. So yeah, moderated tests are just a super helpful tool for getting the kind of like the juiciest feedback, especially when either you or your friends aren't super comfortable with playtests yet.
But that said, and I think people don't talk about this enough, the state of being watched by the dev also impacts how they play. Which is why it's also important to put the game out there in a wider way and get a sort of cloud of data back. Individual points that you gather this way are going to be of lower quality because you don't necessarily understand where that individual is coming from. But if you see repeated themes from this sort of data aggregation, that's probably more valuable than any single piece of feedback, even if it's from someone you know well and understand, and they're in your target player base.
A bit of advice I got when playtesting: pay attention to consistent feedback. I got this bit of feedback once that just stuck in my head, even though I know it was wrong. It was like pissing me off. So I decided to implement it. Of course it was wrong, but like one person said it. You know, I was telling my game dev friend after the fact, and they were like, only pay attention to things that you hear consistently. And I would add on to that also from people you trust, and you know, I trusted them.
Another thing to think about is how you brief your playtesters so that they understand what you're trying to achieve with the test.
The worst playtesting experiences I've had are from people looking at my game, identifying problems with it, but feeling like they shouldn't articulate anything because the game looked too far along for their feedback to matter. They couldn't conceive that I would be willing to completely redesign what I had based on their feedback. And so my biggest piece of advice when preparing your game for playtesting, particularly early on, is to make it abundantly clear that this is supposed to be a prototype. For my latest iteration, I slapped a box on the title screen explaining what a pre-alpha is. I left in placeholder images, janky animations, models without heads. Nothing that fundamentally distracted from the atmosphere I was trying to create, or made it seem like I didn't care, but I tried to give constant reminders that this project was prone to change and open to those suggestions.
Sometimes you don't want playtesters to know too much. Here's the developer of first-person puzzle game Escape from Mu to tell us about A/B testing two versions of a game with slightly different setups.
In Escape from Mu, when we wanted to decide if we were going to remove the jump, our indicators were: is a player trying to jump repeatedly? Is a player realizing there is no jump? Is a player stating jump is not working because they are completely expecting it to be there? We had this area at the beginning. They were able to go across it with no jumping. We had two versions, one with jumping and the another one there was no jumping. And in the one with the jumping, the jump was a very low jump because it's not a platforming game, it's a puzzle game. We actually got the feedback there was no purpose in having jumping in the game because it was so low. It was most annoying than useful. Also, the players playing the build with no jumping, a lot of them even didn't realize.
Adam, aka Fartfish, is the developer of the traditional roguelike Alchemist's Alcove and host of the 2025 Boss Rush Jam on itch.io. Adam described a methodology I hadn't personally heard of before. It's kind of more popular in UX and web design and stuff like that, but it makes a lot of sense as a way for indie developers to quickly improve their games when they don't have access to a massive pool of playtesters.
RITE testing stands for Rapid Iterative Testing and Evaluation, and that's exactly what it means. It involves testing a product, evaluating the results of the test, improving on the product, and repeating as rapidly as possible. Mainly, you'll want to be on the lookout for glaring problems that can be solved and improved upon. You and however many people on your team watch a single person play your game. Make sure to write down everything that might seem even slightly noteworthy, and keep communication to an absolute minimum. Only interact with the playtester when it becomes absolutely necessary. For example, if they run into a roadblock without any possibility of overcoming it. Tell them beforehand to try and talk about anything that's going on in their mind while they play. What they're thinking, how they're feeling, etc., etc. Once the playtest is over, look over your notes and watch a recording of the playtest so you can write down anything you might have missed. Then, wherever the playtester ran into a serious problem, try to fix that problem. RITE testing isn't meant to make your game easy to play, it's meant to make your game easy to want to play by removing the obstacles that prevent players from wanting to continue playing it. Once you've fixed a satisfying amount of problems, rinse and repeat with a new playtester. Ideally, they won't run into the problems the previous playtester ran into, but if they do, you'll need to come up with a solution for the next playtest. Now, when you release your game, new players won't be running into these issues and will be more likely to enjoy playing your game. First and most humbling problem I ran into for my game, Alchemist's Alcove, I had wanted players to feel a sense of frustration at limited resources, but an overall satisfying buildup of power over time. But that buildup never came, and playtesters were left with endless frustration trying to amass spells. Every spell had only one use. This meant that you would spend a bunch of time and effort crafting a spell, use it once to kill maybe 1 or 2 enemies, and then it was just gone forever. I solved this problem by giving spells multiple uses. I still wanted a slow buildup of power, so I didn't give them infinite uses, but I gave them enough uses to provide a sense of longevity that made them actually worth crafting. With this single change, reception from playtesters had vastly improved. This was just one of many issues that I solved with RITE testing, and why I can't help but recommend it. It's an incredibly powerful tool once you understand how to use it, and it can help to vastly improve your game.
Most of the developers I spoke to drew a distinction between the kind of small-scale testing, where the developer actually watches the test, asks questions and maybe intervenes if there's a problem, versus the kind of testing which would happen on a larger platform like Steam or itch, where people are just playing the game and leaving feedback after the fact, like, this is ish, stop making games, I hate you, all of that kind of stuff.
If you're on Steam, you can use their own playtest feature, both for initial private playtests and for larger, more public ones. I recommend doing it in stages. Once the friends and family playtests started going okay for me, I started organizing slightly larger playtests with people that had expressed interest online. I did this by driving people to sign up for my newsletter, from where I would then send them Steam keys. At this point, I also added analytics so I could analyze how far people were getting into the game and how much they were interacting with different systems without being there myself to see. And thank goodness I did that then, because it was very helpful in the next phase. Once the newsletter playtests were going okay, I ran the first public playtest, marketed it as a beta, where anyone could join automatically via the Steam page. I followed Chris Zukowski's advice to make a big marketing beat out of it, and it worked out better than expected because a writer for Rock Paper Shotgun saw my Reddit posts and wrote an article about it, which brought in more than 1,000 playtesters, which was awesome, but also unexpected. So I had to add a wait list so I would have the time to address the feedback and fix the bugs, so I wouldn't waste people's time having them report issues that a lot of others had already reported. I definitely got lucky there, but if I wasn't already turning it into a big marketing beat, that journalist never would have seen it on Reddit, and so the marketing effort is worth it even if most of the time it doesn't lead to much, because you never know who's reading. I then actually scaled back down to doing a few more closed playtests with keys sent out via the newsletter, as I now had much more focused design questions, like balance, that I mostly wanted the more hardcore players to test. And at a certain point, I started getting consistent enough positive feedback that it came time to release the demo.
My other major advice when getting your game play tested is to run it past a few people first, then gradually expand it from there. Since my game is deduction based, for my second round of playtesting I signed up 20 people from the Golden Idol Discord. And it was soul-crushing to hear the same feedback 20 times over as they all discovered the exact same game-breaking bug or piece of broken logic. And I found it overwhelming trying to manage the responses and ask for follow-up impressions when there was so much work to do. In the hopefully near future, once people are generally enjoying my game and the vertical slice is complete, I plan to gather 100 playtesters to get some proper metrics. But in these early days, I can only really cope with 2 corroborating accounts on how much it sucks. So I'd say keep your game contained, find the highest quality testers you can, so you can road test it before you stress test it.
We've talked about how you can playtest, but what about who? Who are your playtesters? And does that impact the kind of information you get from a playtest? Is it better to test with people who know and like the kind of game you're making, or with total noobs? The answer may surprise you. It's not a surprising answer, it's what you'd expect. You know, it depends, that kind of stuff.
To help decrypt what they're saying, I try to get a window into their subjectivity. No matter who it is, I like to find out what their favorite games are and why. This tells you a lot about their primary gaming motivations and whether it's going to line up with yours in the first place. I also like to know what the closest games are to mine that they've played, so I can know what kind of experience they're bringing to it. Experienced players are really good for understanding your target audience because they understand the language of the genre. But your game isn't exactly those games, so they might be bringing preconceived notions that you're going to have to figure out how to unteach during the game. As an example, we've got my current game Disinherited, which is a side-scrolling roguelike. But the difference is that it's primarily reaction-based. You need to catch, deflect, throw, and parry. But because it reminds people of Dead Cells, Hollow Knight, and Hades, they want to just stand next to an enemy and whack it until it dies. But the main attack is intentionally underpowered to guide you toward using those other methods of combat. It showed me that I need to add extra guidance for experienced players too, because they have to change how they're thinking about it. But don't write off inexperienced players because they can be great playtesters too, especially in figuring out whether your game onboards people from different backgrounds well. They might struggle with the gameplay, but their feedback is going to center a lot around the art and the characters and the story. In particular, the questions that they ask can be really illuminating. Those can show you the most intriguing hooks that are in your narrative, and they can show you some promises that your story is making that you have to deliver on, whether you intended to make those promises or not.
When we were making 10 Bells, my fiance and her friend playtested the game shortly before release. They are mobile gamers, but they didn't play Steam games and they didn't play horror games. And ours was an anomaly horror game for Steam. So some might think, where's the value in that? But they went in with a completely fresh take. They were looking at things and asking questions, which made us actually stop and think and help telegraph things in the game. We were kind of still finding out what the rules of the genre were as we were making the game, and having people come from outside of Steam gamers and horror gamers, we were able to use their feedback and ultimately make the game better. So sometimes it really does help to get people from outside of a genre to playtest the game, because they can get some really unique insight, which someone like a seasoned anomaly horror game fan might not feedback.
Playtesting is not a one-size-fits-all thing. That's not how I think about it. So as a new developer, playtesting is more like it's small scale, high quality. You want to find people who are kind of in alignment with you about what you're trying to make, because you are kind of more focused on like, how do I get good at the thing that I am trying to get good at? You know, like I do a lot of narrative heavy stuff. So a lot of the people I go to for advice or feedback really are people who are into that. And so they're able to high detail workshop my stuff line by line. I can ask them specific things and they're going to, about like the, maybe more technical stuff. They're going to understand all that. Whereas you're shipping a product, you got to scale up.
I worked on a fighting game that had a good audience, and they had a sort of dedicated, early tester community And that's interesting because you have people who really care about the game and they're really hardcore. Bigger fighting game devs will bring in top players as playtesters, and they have ulterior motives. They will legitimately hide powerful things that they find. And so really like testing with high level players is really a gamble. It really has to be people you trust. You know, high level players don't give good advice, so focus. I know it's mean, but I really believe it. Focus on, you know, people you trust and focus on behaviors. You know, they can tell you a lot about how the game plays, but they really don't have good advice on what changes that should be made.
Hopefully everything you've heard today will have given you some insights into different approaches and rationales. Like I said at the start, there isn't one correct way to go about any of this. You could go into the biggest, most professionalized game dev studio and you would still find conflicting advice on how to run a good playtest. The really important thing is that you accept that it's often a vital part of making a good game, and you take on the responsibility for developing your own playtesting methodology for the games that you work on. As someone who's spent half their adult career making games and the other half in academia, I see a lot of similarities between playtesting and undertaking any other kind of research. Researchers don't just do experiments that have been set up by someone else. They design their experiments based on the thing that they're trying to study and what sort of information they're trying to glean from that process. Playtesting, like any kind of research, has methods, the things we can do in order to carry out the research. But it also has methodologies. A method is a way of doing something. A methodology is the reasoning behind doing it that way. Now, I didn't select the clips for this video based on how much I agreed with them, although I do agree with all of them. What I wanted was for you to hear all of these devs thinking out loud, explaining their rationale for why they do things the way that they do them, because that is the kind of thinking that you have to learn to do as a developer, and it's helpful to hear other people think about their process, whether you're just starting out or whether this is something that you do regularly already. Your own playtesting methodology is going to vary for lots of different reasons, depending on the style of game that you're making, how far along it is when you start playtesting, even personal things like, I don't know, which of the issues in your game are you more or less aware of and sensitive to? Playtesting isn't about giving players carte blanche to tell you exactly what game to make. You're not there to get a bunch of suggestions and ideas from them. You're the creative director, you're the project manager, you're the expert on your game. But being an expert in your own game is actually a problem for understanding what it's like to play it, what it's like to learn it, whether it works. When you're testing the early part of your game, your tutorialization, your first time user experience, you can never really put yourself in the shoes of someone who doesn't already know how to play it. And conversely, when your game is more full featured and closer to launch and it's got all the stuff in that you think it should have before it goes on sale, there will nearly always be a small hardcore of testers who are able to find strategies and exploits that you simply didn't think of because you're too locked into playing the game the proper way. For a game to be successful, there needs to be some sort of group of players that find it initially appealing, and then that same group need to find it learnable and engaging once they're actually playing it. Playtesting is how we gain insights into those things. It's how we understand what happens when a real person interacts with the game without being cursed by the designer's knowledge of how it's meant to be played or how it works under the hood.
Mechanics, they're the verbs that change the game. Mechanics, they're the things that a player can do to the CPU.
Please, can I have more video game?